So given that this is the beginning of the course and we're just getting started, I'm not assuming that anyone knows how to save files or understands file formats. So if you're familiar with this already, take a look at this tutorial anyway and just see if there's anything there that you didn't know about. But for the most part, this is pretty much file fundamentals. I will start by just opening this file landscape.psd and just trying to save it out, going to File, Save As. And what I recommend people use is the Save As command, because once you've saved a file, let's say for example I make a change here, as soon as I start to edit the file and do something physically to it, let's just do a little crop here. I then have the option of just choosing save, and that's going to record over my original file, and that's not always the best option. Usually you want to do a save as, just because when you do this you're able to select the name that you want to call this, and that ensures that you won't record over your original file, and that's a good thing. So landscape 2 would be a good name. Anything along the lines of a sequential order that you'll remember, would be a good thing. So you can landscape 2, 3, 4, 5. And so you can constantly go back if something does happen to files. And you have to remember, with computers, things constantly happen. Files do get corrupted. You'd be surprised what can happen to your files in the short course of this class. So believe me, I've seen and heard it all. So it wouldn't surprise me. If it would surprise you what could happen to your file, please don't take the chance. Just save often and change the names often and back up your work often as much as you can. Burn it to a CD. Just constantly back up your work. All right. When I choose Save As, this is the Macintosh OS interface, obviously, but if you're a Windows user and you've only used files or software a few times before, you may want to just review the Windows operating system in terms of saving files and how it works. But basically here I've got a little triangle, and this triangle can open and close, and in the Macintosh OS I want to make sure that's open so that I can see exactly where I'm saving the file, which hard drive and which folder it's going inside of. So you want to save it to a particular folder that you're familiar with, a place where you know it'll be safe, and you're good to save it. So if the safe place on your home computer is the desktop for now, that's fine, but whatever hard drive you think is a safe place to save to, that would be a fine. The format is your next big choice, and you've got a lot of different choices here, going from Photoshop down to Targa and TIFF. You've got a whole range of different file formats. I'll just tell you now that even though we've got a lot of different file formats, you really don't need to be familiar with them at all, because all we're ever going to use is the Photoshop file format. And there was a time once when I would stress a lot of different formats for saving under, but that time is really past. Photoshop file format is pretty standard. It's pretty universal. It's a very common file format these days, and there's not a whole lot of software out there, including Apple software, believe it or not, that isn't compatible with Photoshop file format. So there's not a whole lot of times nowadays when I feel like I have to save anything outside the Photoshop file format. But there are times when you do need to save in other formats, not for this class, but for other purposes, and I'll just sort of point those out to you. One would be a GIF file. GIF files are a heavily compressed file format that you only want to use if you're going to the web, and if you're going to be using Dreamweaver or some type of web design program, then you're going to be working with GIF files at some point. But GIF files are extremely degraded in quality. Just realize that in order to get these file sizes down and to get it to fit on the web and keep the speed of the web browser up, GIF files are heavily compromised. So they're not things that we want to use for our print files or for Photoshop work in general, unless it's designed specifically for the web. Now, another web format you're probably familiar with is called JPEG, and this one is much better than GIF. This one is also compromised and compressed to varying degrees depending upon which settings you choose, but the quality is far superior than the GIF quality. So for high quality downloads or to save space for whatever reason and you want to maybe email pictures to a friend or to somebody, JPEG is the way to go. Just choose a compression quality that's not going to degrade the image too much. The other formats are really kind of very specialized formats that you would only use in very certain cases. For example, Photoshop 2.0. You probably don't know anybody. I'm guessing you don't know anybody or work with anyone who has software that old, but Photoshop 2.0 is going way back. That's the first version of Photoshop I ever used, and I don't think anyone's still got a copy of it. It came on floppy disks. That's how old it is. So anyway, this is there because when 3.0 came out, they changed the file format. So if there's some chance of someone has some archaic program, this is there for you. Photoshop RAW, PDF, these are all Photoshop variations that you may use in specific situations from time to time. If you've got a raw image that you shot with your digital camera, then usually you're going to want to always keep a copy of that original raw data and the sidecar data that goes with that. But if you for some reason decide to save it as a Photoshop RAW, that's another opportunity for you to save it as a higher bit image. PICT files are kind of the Macintosh equivalent to a BMP in the Windows world. So you've got BMP up here and you've got PICT files. They're also kind of, they're a little on the old side. They've been around for a long time, and they were originally kind of the file format you had to save to if you had a bitmapped image and you wanted it to be part of your multimedia presentation back with old programs like Macromedia Director and such. But yeah, PICT files, there might be situations where you might need one, but it's not too common. And the same goes for BMP, but there is some software out there that may require you to save in those formats. I'm not going to go over every specialized format, but there are other ones here. Targa is for NewTek products. Pixar is for RenderMan and for Pixar products. TIFF file format is a very common one, and this is one where the file format that most people use to print from years ago, and it's still very common as far as sharing print files around. But because Adobe has now kind of come back into that marketplace in terms of InDesign and creating layout work, layout software, and has kind of taken over a lot of other companies and come out with a large package. Photoshop is really kind of standardized to the point where I think you could get away with using the Photoshop file format in most situations. But there are still some programs out there that may prefer TIFF, and so TIFF is there for you if you need it. At any rate, that's pretty much it. Once you've found a location that you can save to, I'll just save this to the desktop real quick. There are some other options down here at the bottom, but like I said, everything you do for me in this class is always Photoshop. That's it. Don't look any further. When it comes to the options down below, you've one very important one, and that is layers. I'm always going to want to see your layers on your files. Don't send me a flattened version. But in the future, if you decide that you want to save a flattened version for printing or for whatever reason, you don't want people to have access to all your layers, you can unclick this and it will save a copied version, so it doesn't record over your original as long as you keep this checked. And it will basically give you a condensed version of your file without all the extra layers and such. So it's a smaller file, but it's not as friendly as far as going backwards and making changes and things. You're really kind of stuck once you've gotten rid of your layers. You always want to keep a layered version of your file somewhere. And the last option is just to embed the color profile, and you'll be able to watch my tutorial on that to understand a little bit more about color profiles later on. But after that, you hit save. It goes to where you told it to. Now this option here in terms of maximize compatibility is very annoying, and I would suggest you turn it off. So I will show you how to do that right now, even though it's also in the tutorial on preferences. I'll do it twice here. But what this does, it just maximizes compatibility with other versions of Photoshop, and it's something you normally want, and it's not going to add too much in file size, I don't believe, to your your images. So, but to turn that off, that question, just go to Photoshop Preferences and go to General, open that up, and we can turn off that compatibility. When it comes to file handling, we can say, where is that? Always ask. Let's see, bin file extension, version Q. I thought it was there, so you should be under file handling. Let me see, am I missing? Oh, here we go. Maximize PSD and PSB file compatibility. It says ask, set that to never, or excuse me, always, and that way it'll always maximize file compatibility. You don't have to keep answering that question every time you save a file. Now, make sure you watch my tutorial on preferences where I talk about all of these, and it's definitely worthwhile to go through and make sure you understand the preferences before you work in Photoshop, and so it's a valuable one. All right, I think that's it. You don't have to turn anything for this tutorial. Obviously, it's just wanted to make sure that you know how to save files and familiar with a little bit familiar with the different formats that are out there for Photoshop.